Hi, I'm Ryan Penny, and welcome to the Catholic Sphere. Each week we have a different host and a different focus as we tackle topics important to Catholics around the globe. Today we're bringing back the topic of manhood, witnessing to authentic masculinity on social media. And to help us to discern the false from the authentic, we are again joined by three Catholic social media influencers: Andy Bukoris from the Carry Your Cross on Instagram, joining us from Massachusetts; Enoch, the Catholic rapper, joining us from Kentucky; and we're also joined again by Jordan Burke from Do the Harder Thing on Instagram. Collectively, these gentlemen have over 60,000 followers. We're talking today again about real manhood, particularly as it's portrayed and either encouraged or discouraged on social media. What could be less masculine than the pandemic that many agree is the number one Achilles heel for men today: pornography? Andy, starting with you, what do you think men are really seeking in pornography? And what do they need to realize that most are blind to?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. Thanks for having me back. As you said, this is an epidemic in the world of men today and women. I definitely focus more on the men's side of it. You know, if you think there's a interesting quote from a poet in Roman times where he says, pretty much if you feed them or give them bread in circuses, they'll never revolt. And porn in today's culture is so rampant. It's not just the porn that people have in their mind where, you go search for specific websites. It's everywhere. It's throughout social media. It's ingrained in the fabric of our culture today, and how people present themselves. What I feel like men are really searching for in porn is just complete, just a complete comfort. It's easy. There's no self-sacrifice needed in any of this. It's a total warped view of sexuality that I feel, deep in my heart that the devil is using in order to warp men's minds around sexuality, forcing them to dive deeper into the world of porn, not go out and find true relationships, find a woman, go get married, build a family. Again, the devil wants to stop the family. He wants to stop the nuclear family, and porn is a perfect way of doing that. When a man goes into porn, becomes addicted to porn, it changes the way that he views people, the way that he views women, but it also changes him at a chemical level as well. It is comfortable. You go there, there's nothing to give. It's all take. It's a total selfish act that can have total destruction on you, your soul, and your family. It's throughout our culture today. It's an epidemic. And just one quick stat: in I believe the year 2021 or 2022, the annual revenue globally for the porn industry was $100 billion. That's more than the NFL, the NHL, the NBA, the MLB combined. Most people don't understand the wide-scale spread of the porn industry and the effect that it's having on men today.
It is an absolute tragedy, Andy, as you just articulated, and people don't realize just how bad it is, how pervasive it is. Thank you for saying all of that. Enoch, what do you see is the most effective way for men to be set free from the snare of pornography?
Yeah, thanks for having me again, guys. Andy, that was so inspiring, brother, what you just said. And just to continue on with that is Saint Pope John Paul II, the great quotes. He says that pornography, the problem with it is not that it shows too much, is that it shows too little. Is the fact that they're not showing the dignity of the soul. They're just reduced to just animal instincts. And when man engages in that, it really starts to change the person from within, and it's really unfortunate. Pornography makes men weak, and weak men make society horrible. So when we're talking about how to kind of break away from the snares, first and foremost, I do have a secret virtue that I could share that can help. But number one, it's because pornography comes off of the concupiscence, is what we call the appetite. Lust and gluttony come from the same appetite, and we talked about in the previous episode, we did talk about the fact that man needs to be the faculties of man need to be integrated back to having the intellect and the will father the lower faculties, so that we can do everything within good reason. And the problem with that appetite, the concupiscence appetite, is that when we fall into gluttony, what we end up doing a lot of times is we make what is supposed to be a means to an end. Everything in life is a means to an end, and the end is a beatific vision for the sake of God. And the means, unfortunately, sometimes become the end. And that is where we fall into our issues. And this is a desire that God has given all of us for a specific purpose. Purpose of food, purpose of sex, all of these things have a means to an end for a specific purpose. So the way to get rid of it, I think, is a natural sense to kind of, first of all, fast, because then you start to repress that appetite that's coming on. Number two, flee from the situation. That's what Joseph did in the Old Testament when he was tempted. He just ran out the other way. He didn't fight it. He didn't, trying to argue against it. He just fled. And number three, what I call the virtue of providentia, which is a virtue of looking at future, making future decisions according to past experiences. These temptations are going to arise again because we become so addicted to it. So the best thing to do is to look at your past experience and say, what did I do different? What can I do different? And write these things down and say, this is how I'm going to act. Every single day, say, if I get tempted, this is what I'm going to do. Create that action plan. And of course, have a devotion to Our Lady. You cannot achieve purity without her. Go to confession as frequent as you can and receive Holy Communion. With all of these, and have a community of people that you can trust and say, hey, I'm struggling. Can I talk to you on the phone? To repress that temptation. You do all of these, you'll break free from it eventually.
Excellent, Enoch. As you said, you have to have a very deliberate action plan. You can't grow in the virtue of chastity. No one's growing in the virtue of chastity by accident. You have to have a deliberate plan. You have to depend utterly on God's grace to give us the strength to be virtuous. Thank you for everything that you said. Jordan, the opposite of this virtue that we're talking about, I've heard you talk often about the problem of effeminacy. It might be a surprise for some to hear of a connection between effeminacy and pornography use. Describe what that connection is and what is the antidote to that problem?
Yeah, so it's first of all important to define what effeminacy means, because there's the societal construct of what effeminacy is, and it's generally associated with women, and that's not what we're talking about. When you read St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa, he defines effeminacy as essentially, this is my shorthand version, but the inability to do the difficult thing. It's an inordinate desire and attachment to easy things, to things that make us weak, to sin, to vice, that sort of a thing. So effeminacy is that as a whole. And that's one of the reasons why people, especially men, are attached to pornography. Pornography is a self-inebriation, right? It's a way to inebriate ourselves like a drug, and it acts on, Andy mentioned this, it acts in our brain as a drug does. Some reports and some studies have linked it to have similar effects to heroin on the brain. So you're combating both the neurological and physiological factors of it, as well as the spiritual factors. And this is what society is missing a lot of the time. And that spiritual factor in the case of man is effeminacy. We have to overcome our lower nature. We have to subjugate our flesh to our intellect and our will that's rightly ordered. If we're led by our flesh, if we're led by our desires, then you're never going to overcome anything, let alone something as serious and as spiritually deadly as pornography.
Right. So just to be clear for our audience, when we say effeminacy, we don't mean to say being feminine. What we're talking about is this power that the passions can very easily take over our reason, our intellect, and our will, which when that happens, it's very dangerous. We become weak as men. We can't do the good that God is calling us to. So we have to fight against this effeminacy by having the virtue of chastity and doing it deliberately, as we've just been discussing. Well said, Jordan. Thank you. Andy, it seems that many men have a hard time turning to prayer because they see turning to prayer as a sign of weakness, using God or the church as a crutch. How is it that you don't see it that way at all? And what has been the greatest motivation to you to persevere in prayer and to see an inseparable link between manhood and being a man of prayer?
Yeah, great question, Ryan. Growing up, I often looked at the church as and the prayer as a sign of weakness. I often looked at it as soft. As I began to really dive into the life of Christ and who Christ was, not just as God, but as a man, and who he was within his masculine virtues, it was so eye-opening to me to see how masculine he actually was. There's often, the depictions of Christ where he might look more feminine and skinny and, bright blue eyes. But Christ was a true, strong man. And any man that goes and carries his cross and goes and is nailed to that cross to save humanity. I mean, he was just, Christ is the truest form of a man. And when we think about prayer, prayer is difficult. It's not easy to go sit in your room and to pray, especially because you don't have instant gratification. You don't go pray and then you get a reward directly after that because you have done that prayer. As I said in a previous episode, you may pray and not see the fruits of that reward, maybe even until later in heaven. You might not see the rewards of that specific prayer. You may see that prayer in forms of miracles during the time on earth, where you're praying for a specific person's conversion, or somebody who is sick and you're wanting them to be healthy, and you do see that reward. So prayer is difficult because you don't always see what that end is going to be. Growing up as a kid, I watched my dad. He would pray every single morning in the living room, and I watched him pray every single day. And I didn't always follow in his footsteps, but as I've watched, as I've grown older and I've seen the blessings that have come into his life, and it hasn't been all blessings, there's been suffering too, but I've seen his perseverance through that, the perseverance of him and my mother's marriage as well. That's definitely helped me to strive to continue to have a daily prayer habit, even when it's arid and I'm not feeling anything. Mother Teresa had the later half of her life, she had the dark night of the soul, where she felt nothing in her prayer, which was great suffering. But that suffering, that difficulty, that doing the harder thing, carrying your cross, that is what being a man is all about. It's hard, it's difficult, it builds discipline, but that when you do that, you build virtue, and you actually do reap rewards because of that.
One of the greatest evidences of the power of prayer is seeing the fruits of it, as you were just talking about, you witnessing the effect that it's had on your father as he's gotten older, and especially in him persevering in his marriage. And leading into my question to you, Enoch, I've heard you talk about how marriage is perfect for perfecting a man in virtue. You speak more about how and why that's the case, and what is it going to take to help men today to see that truth?
Yeah, to quote the great G.K. Chesterton, who's very quotable, marriage is a duel to the death, which men of honor should never decline. And I think the reason is when we're left to our own lower faculties and left to our own desires, men can tend to be selfish and very immature. It's just how we are. And we tend to sacrifice others for the sake of our pleasure versus vice versa. And I think what marriage really does to a man is you take the person, first of all, to prepare that person for marriage, for their vocation. And we talked about the virtue of chastity. Every married person can relate to this. You get these dreaded words from the doctor after our wives have had a baby. You don't touch it for 8 weeks now. And if you don't have the virtue of chastity, it's going to be very hard for you to keep that. And then, what it does, it really starts to build interior discipline within the man. And then you have this child that comes onto the world. And now you have this responsibility that's beyond yourself, your wife and your child, to provide and to protect, to get on your knees and pray so you can keep the demons away from your home. All of these interior things that you're doing on a daily basis just to provide and to protect, it really just renders you away from yourself. And everything that you do is for the sake of the other person. And that's what makes manhood. So in all of reality, when you have a child that you brought into the world, now you have this struggle of forming this child of, and you can't give what you don't have. So if you don't have the virtue necessary to pass on to this child, you better start to build that virtue. So that way we can create a great society, because that child has a crown in heaven, and that crown in heaven was made for them. And if we do not make them aware of that crown in heaven, we're really shortchanging them. So this is why I think keeping the faith, becoming a good man, is the greatest inheritance that you can give to your child, greater than food and comfort and home. It's to give them what you have, which is virtue and your faith.
And you can't give what you don't have. And that's what all this is about. It has to be chosen deliberately. And as you're just talking about, marriage is the context in which a man must rise up to sacrifice himself, which is why it can be so perfect for perfecting a man in virtue. Thank you for everything you just said, Enoch. That's awesome. And speaking about marriage and fatherhood, Jordan, one of your most memorable Instagram reels is called The Heart of a Father. And I've also heard you say, for any good man, seeing someone hurt his little girl would make any man desire to inflict the most lethal retribution against the perpetrator. And not that he would necessarily, but you're speaking about the intense love a man should have. Can you speak to this link between manhood and fatherhood, and what is it going to take men to realize this need that they have to become fathers, if not physically, at least spiritually?
Yeah, having a little girl, even having any child, boy or girl, it doesn't matter, but having a little girl specifically really opened my eyes a lot to the reality of the love that God has for me. Because I'm sitting here and I'm experiencing this emotion of, yeah, if someone hurt my daughter, I would burn down an entire city and salt the earth afterwards. That's the desire I have. Not that I would actually do it, but that's the desire, because I have this intense love. I have this desire to serve my child and make sure that she gets to heaven, make sure that she's safe. And then I pause and I think, well, I'm this broken human being who is full of weakness and sin, and I'm experiencing this level of emotion. How much more does God love me, who's perfect and who has a pure experience of these emotions that he's gifted to me? How much more is that love? And so then it becomes this beautiful kind of cyclical nature of, okay, well, if I'm aiming to perfect myself, if I'm aiming to choose virtue, if I'm aiming to unify my will with God's will, how do I perfect my love in such a way that it is a reflection of the love that God has for me? So it's bringing it to a level deeper. I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering your question. I apologize, but I think it's definitely, excuse me, it's on the heart of every man for sure. It should be. And if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I don't know if I have that, you may want to go sit in prayer, go to adoration, and think about that. Because I truly believe the heart of every man, Andy touched on this, is not just the desire to fight for something, but I believe that in the heart of every man is deeply the desire to fight for something worth dying for, to be able to give your life as Christ gave his life. And what is that in our lives? And how do we tap into that? And how do we allow that to perfect our virtue and perfect our love for those who are around us? And in this case, our children, our wives, but even those that we come into contact with daily. And that's another thing that we have to keep in mind.
That is perfectly said, Jordan. Thank you. Andy, why do you think that the slow, methodic development of faith will become more popular despite the popularity of our fast-moving society?
Yeah, I mean, that idea that Jordan just brought up about something worth dying for, it really is, it's something that every man does truly want. When you think about, there are really two things. When you're able to have a family, I know we're going to talk about the faith, but let's start with the family. When you have a family, you have a son or a daughter. I think about my son, and Christ says, no greater love than a man who dies for his friends. And that is something that every man can strive for. If you can, on your deathbed one day, if you know that I knew that I had these people that I loved so much that I would die for them, that is a monumentous place that any man can get to. I feel bad for a man that has to go to his deathbed knowing that he never had that type of relationship. When you think about the church and the faith, something that is so true that it's worth dying for. You look back into the martyrs, the lives of the saints, people who did actually die for the faith. I really recommend anybody, especially in the early church, to look back into the early church saints who actually did go and die for the faith, something that they truly believed and follow in the footsteps of Christ. That is something that every man can truly strive for. And it's hard. You have to look in the mirror and say, would I die for my faith? Would I do that? And that's a hard thing. And I hope that I would. I think every man does. And I think every man is looking for that. You can find that in a family, and building a family, having children, but also in a faith, your family, your Catholic brothers and sisters, and the faith itself. When we think about the faith that's growing because our world is becoming so easy today, the church offers discipline. It offers a way to carry your cross, to follow the example of Christ and actually live a virtuous lifestyle. I think so many more men are going to continue to come to the church, see it as what it truly is. Our society, our culture has tried to hide this from so many men today. They don't understand what the church truly has to offer. And when you uncover those secrets, you begin to see just an incredible life that is not always easy. It's not always perfect and fun. There might be suffering involved in that, but there's also virtue and rewards at the end of that, and living that type of lifestyle.
And what you and Jordan were just talking about is the fact that if men don't find something worth not just giving themselves to, but actually laying down their very lives for, then their lives will lack a meaning. And the church, as you're just saying, is what gives us that meaning, and it teaches us how to lay down our lives for our families, for our wives, for our children, and ultimately for our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who is the perfect model of manhood and who laid down his life for all of us to save us. Sacrifice has the power to save the world, and Christ calls us to participate that as well. And we won't be able to do that if we're attached to comfort, which leads me to my question to you, Enoch. You have talked about how St. John of the Cross talks about attachment to consolations and prayer, and the connection between that and men wanting immediate, tangible rewards to what they pursue. Can you speak to that?
Sure. Thanks, Andy, for that as well. It was very inspiring. St. John of the Cross is so inspiring, so great, is because we talked about the virtue of integrity. He reached that before his departure into the world. He labored. Everything that he did was for the sake of God. And he was Edenized, I guess you would say. He was brought back to that perfect person that Adam was in Eden before he passed on. And because of that, I think pious tradition holds that he didn't even see purgatory because he faces purgatory here on earth. He was perfected in virtue here on earth. So it's an inspiration. It's what we all should aspire to. It's what Vatican II calls the call to holiness for every single man. And we should achieve. But as far as detachments and I think we need to build, as far as men, as what we called a shopping cart society. And what that means is another definition of man is to always do the right thing, or do the hard thing, I guess you could say, thanks to Jordan, even if someone's not looking, even if it means no reward. And the shopping cart society means that if you leave your shopping cart next to your car, no one's going to say anything to you. Everybody already does it. You could justify it to no end. You get no rewards if you put it back. You get no pushback if you leave it next to your car. But you do it because it's the right thing to do. You put your shopping cart back. So this is why I think detachment from pleasure and from self and from vainglory is going to be the important thing about authentic masculinity. You do it because it's the right thing to do, and you do it because it's for the sake of God, not because you get something out of it.
Excellent, Enoch. Very well said. And I think, Jordan, this is going to be the last question for today. Can you help us to distinguish between authentic and false masculinity on social media?
Sure. Yeah, I think it comes down to what is your end goal? Who are you doing it for? I was thinking about what Andy said and this dying, right? This dying for something else. And the thought that I had was, well, you can't die for yourself because that's suicide, right? You can't.
Right.
Your end goal cannot be yourself. Your end goal cannot be, well, how many nice cars do I have? How big is my house? How many gadgets do I have? It's this less, you're giving to others, and the virtue, right? You're giving to others. That's the goal. What am I dying for? I'm dying for Christ. I'm dying for my family. I think of that. We talked about this before, the Nativity movie, where St. Joseph, depicted in the movie, gives bread to Mary and the donkey, and there's none for himself. That's dying for others. That's giving up what you desire, even something that is an objectively normal thing, hunger, and you're sacrificing for those that you love. So I think when we're trying to differentiate between what's real and what's authentic Catholic masculinity, what's virtuous on social media versus what the society wants, is you can just ask, what's the end goal? That's a litmus test. Is this for me? Is this me peacocking and trying to get other people's attention? I look at all the nice things I have. Is it what Enoch was just talking about, doing things in the silence that will never be recognized by anybody else, but your audience is in heaven, and ideally that reward comes in heaven? And even in some ways, not even doing it for a reward, just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
The true test of manhood, as you were just saying, is, are you willing to do it? Are you willing to do the right thing, to make that sacrifice even when nobody's looking? Are you willing to do it in secret? That's a perfect way to end this show, this excellent two-part discussion. Thank you again, Andy, Enoch, and Jordan, for joining us again today. And thank all of you for joining us. Don't forget us next week with host Father Joseph Mary Wolf, right here on The Catholic Sphere.